Hello, this is Matthew Chan of the extortionletterinfo.com website. And I have with me Oscar Michelin. We are here to do our third Getty Images audio recording, and we're here today to do an update. How are you doing, Oscar?
Oh, well, Matthew, how are you doing? Good to speak to you again about this.
Yes, I really appreciate you taking the time out to share with our audience the latest updates and situation concerning Getty. And why don't you share with our audience some of the highlights of what's happened since our last recording? Now, I understand that there's certain things you can't talk about, but share that information that you can provide to the rest of us.
Right. Obviously, the site has been very popular, and certainly to be commended for starting the dialogue on this. You know,
Thank you.
The site is attracting hundreds and hundreds of people to send inquiries. They're sending us notes that they're getting educated on the issue, and I think they're appreciating the content and the information that we're putting out there. Currently, we're probably at about 95 businesses that we represent on this Getty issue that have come to us through the website. So obviously the program is popular. But out of those 95, I'm going to say, for every one of those 95, there's probably 6 others who contact us either with quick questions or to just trade their stories or let them know that, unfortunately, they cut a big check to Getty before they got to us and got educated on the issue or what have you. So, I mean, literally hundreds of people have come to us through the website because they're thirsty for information and they're not getting the answers from Getty, obviously. So it's a big, nice core group that we have, and Getty certainly has taken notice. We have been engaging in correspondence back and forth with their corporate counsel, Lisa Wilmer.
Yes.
As every new matter comes in, we reach out to her, let them know that they're part of our cases, and we continue our ongoing dialogue with her. We're at the point now where, we've negotiating some settlement amounts to try to see what's a fair amount that people can pay to end the litigation and not have to continue to deal with it. Because when we're dealing with the settlement aspect of it, we had decided that we're not going to really discuss the liability portion right now, and that is, am I legally responsible for having this image on the website? And should there be litigation over it, we certainly would, contest that issue as well, not just what's the infringement, quote-unquote, worth, but also where did the image come from? Did the photographer allow it to be on a CD photo disc? Did they allow it to be on another site where they were told it could be downloaded for free? So there are certainly issues as to how the image ended up on someone's website, but for the settlement purposes, we've been talking really about what's fair and reasonable. And the real hard distinction that we're having between us and Getty is over what's fair market value. Because I want to make clear, I know we've discussed this on our other posts and our other conversations, chances are that these images were used at a time when they were not registered. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
Getty does not generally register their images until they sue somebody over it, and we'll get to that later. So since the images were not registered, Getty can only get their actual damages. So the vast majority of time in the conversations with us and Getty has been focusing on what are the actual damages for using one image on a website. And that's really been the discussion. So Getty feels that they're allowed to say, this is what our price estimator charges on our website, plus reasonable costs for monitoring and enforcing the images. And that comes to somewhere between $1,000 per image up to $1,300 per image.
That's what they claim.
That's what they're claiming.
Yes.
Right. Now, our position is that it's the marketplace that matters, okay? In other words, what Getty's price point is just a starting point. That a court is going to look at what would the end user have paid had they not gone to Getty and gone out in the marketplace. What's the average cost of an image? And the reason why we feel that is because you may be surprised to hear this, but this idea that Getty has of applying a retroactive license for a use that you didn't have permission for is a relatively novel concept. it's not something that's existed in copyright law for all time. It's only been a couple of years, really, that courts have recognized it. And in New York, it was recognized by a case called Davis. And the Davis case clearly said that it's the marketplace that matters, and that a court should make believe that there's a hypothetical negotiations between the end user and the infringed party. And in one part of the case, which is very critical, the court says if the infringed party was asking too much money, that person would have walked away and gone to the marketplace. Okay, so that's really where we're putting our eggs, if you will, on that part of the case, as well as the clear indication from the case that the price the person was charging is not the be-all, end-all. And then secondly, and most importantly, we keep insisting that costs of monitoring and enforcement are not part of actual damages, because you can't get your legal fees and you can't get your legal costs, so that therefore costs of enforcement and monitoring, as Getty calls it, don't factor into the equation. Now,
well, they would not admit to that, but I think you and I would I think you and I would agree that their department is supposed to be a revenue generating department. And so part of that is they want to recuperate, I guess, Pig Scout costs and so forth.
Well, Pig Scout works on the 50-50. So if Pig Scout gets 50% of whatever Getty acquires from the alleged infringer, but then Getty, of course, has hired all of these young people and these interns and other people to administer the program. That's the cost that they're trying to recoup.
Yes, that's correct.
You know, Pig Scout, the way it works out is Pig Scout says, we have the technology, you have the labor. And then, you know, we had the R&D to put up the technology, so you're going to have some costs in getting these letters out and in hiring people to make the phone calls and the emails and the follow-ups. And then, of course, Getty's and Pig Scout's share is reduced when the case gets over to the NCS recovery section, you know, the collection part of it.
Well, you know, what they're trying to do, and which is a big problem too for what I'm trying to do, is find out more if I was going to settle with them, is they're doing what they call Hollywood accounting. Have you heard that term, Hollywood accounting?
Yeah.
Well, they pile all these expenses on there,
exactly.
And it makes it look like that a movie didn't make any money at all. And so they're kind of doing a similar type of principle here. They're piling on all these costs that's involved with this and expecting someone to fully reimburse them.
Right.
And I have to believe that they've also factored in statistically that there's people they're not going to collect in. So the people who pay really pay for others who haven't paid. You know, it's pretty much a raw deal for the people who actually cooperate.
Right.
It makes me crazy because they're so uninformed.
It really is. It's a question of risk tolerance, risk and pain tolerance, if you will, because a number of my clients have said to me, let's work out a reasonable number. We don't want to we don't want to go into lawsuit, and I understand that, and they have every right. And we're negotiating certainly with Getty to try to reach that number. But this dialogue is all part of that. Trying to agree. We feel that the numbers we've offered, somewhere between $100 to $200 per image, are a very reasonable offer and something that Getty should certainly consider. But to date, they have not. Now, the good news is we've had some success, and they've taken a different approach on sites that are totally not-for-profit sites. And they've taken a different approach on some sites that are what they call hobbyist-type sites.
Yes.
A mom and pop put up something about that they're interested in.
So we're making a little bit of progress here.
Right. So there's definitely progress. And there's certainly progress in expanding the discussion in the sense of trying to hopefully settle this issue. And I don't mean to make it sound all grandiose, but there is a very large unknown about what these claims are worth. And that leads us to the next part, which is that we have found out Getty has, in fact, filed some lawsuits over this. The first ones were kind of filed that we saw late 2005, early 2006. They stopped for a while, and they started again we found some in 2008. And I think all told, we found somewhere between a dozen to 20 lawsuits. Now,
did any of them go to conclusion? I mean, to a verdict, or did most of them all get settled out, or did all of them get settled out?
Well, what has happened is this. None of them were actually contested. Of the ones that we located, first of all of them involved more than 20 images. So Getty obviously is picking and choosing and correctly going after folks with the most images. That makes the most economic sense.
Yes, that's correct.
Of the lawsuits we've found, all of the ones we have found have either gone by way of default, meaning the defendant just said, I'm abandoning the case, I'm not answering, and Getty has an empty paper judgment that it has to try to collect from a defunct, probably, website and a defunct corporation, or they've settled before an answer was even due. So it's kind of hard to say how the courts have treated this issue because from what I could find, no court has ever decided the issue. Now, obviously, you and I both know that if in a prior lawsuit Getty had won a decision in its favor, that would have been shoved down our throat a while ago.
Absolutely. There would be a press release, and, it would be
It
highly publicized.
Or their counsel would just send me a letter saying, you should look at this case.
Yes, yes.
So I think we feel pretty comfortable that there's no legal conclusion against us. And what we've been trying to do is get Getty, and I hope they'll do it soon, to just answer these questions that we've asked of them. Do they agree with the holding in the Davis case? Do they agree that it doesn't allow them to get monitoring and enforcement? Have they considered the fact that when a website offers you $100 or $200 per image, that's a lot better than you suing them shutting down, and you getting zero? Do the photographers know that? Do the photographers have input into how much these claims should be settled for?
Well, that was one of the things I brought up in my letter, that I wanted to talk to the photographer himself, and I found him on the internet, and I was prepared to contact him and initiate a discussion, figure out how much they know about this, and how much they would get reimbursed and so forth. So I was engaged in my own discovery process, which you probably would do if this thing actually went to court.
Right, but the problem is these photographers have signed over those decisions to Getty. They have an agreement with Getty that Getty has the exclusive right to negotiate these issues and to enforce their copyright. And so they've kind of made this deal where they get the benefit of having Getty process their images for sale, so that there's this tremendous amount of exposure which they could never replicate for sure. So on the other hand, they lose a little bit of control over their rights. And they don't know exactly how much Getty is getting, and we don't know whether Getty is disclosing this to them or not. We know that there's a lawsuit pending from a number of photographers against Getty, and there are motions to dismiss the case and for summary judgment, so we're watching that case very closely to try to see how photographers' rights are going to be enforced by the court. But there's never really been a decision as to whether Getty's position is accurate. Now, the other news is that just this week, we were hired by a company who got sued by Getty. They had their regular business lawyer, I guess, try to work things out. They weren't able to work it out, and Getty has sued them right here in my home area in the Southern District of New York.
Which is convenient.
Oh, it's great. I litigate frequently here. And it's funny, but I don't know for sure, but I think that one of the reasons why Getty litigates in New York is not because it's not only because they have a strong corporate presence here, they do a lot of business out of New York, but also because the Davis case came out of New York. And while we think it helps us, at the very least, this case does establish the right to claim this backward license, this this relatively new theory of actual damages that says you can get a retroactive license fee. So we have a little bit of an opportunity now to have this kind of discussion that you and I are having in front of a federal magistrate or a federal judge. And Getty has very good counsel, a very well-known firm. There's a possibility, hopefully, that we can maybe come to some agreement on who's right over how you value these pictures. Now, it's kind of funny because I think, as happens often with this type of litigation, both sides can be kind of nervous about that. And that's the reason why many cases settle, because there's a certainty to settlement that you can't beat.
That's true. It can be very unpredictable in a courtroom.
Sure. A courtroom can be very unpredictable. As well-reasoned and intelligent as your arguments may be, a judge has a very possibility of disagreeing with you. Then you have an appeals process, and you have to wonder about whether you have the time and expense and the guts to drag that out. So it's not as easy as it may sound to sustain a federal lawsuit. So we're hoping that maybe we can get a little bit closer on where the dollar values ought to be for these infringements, to allow people to make a reasonable offer to Getty, have them recognize the benefit of settling with them, and then moving on. Because I think, as I know you and I have discussed many times, I think in the end, this is going to be a more of a backlash against Getty than maybe Getty even realizes.
Now, do you think that this line in the sand is going to be drawn very soon? I know you spent a lot of time on this over the course of the weeks and months. I mean, at some point, I'm guessing that there has to be some kind of stalemate if you can't come to some agreement. What are your thoughts on that?
I do. I agree with you. I think that obviously there may come a point where they'll be at a number that the majority of my clients won't be willing to pay, and we may have no other recourse than to say you're going to have to institute a lawsuit. Now, understand something. Even though we represent over 90 businesses, we don't represent them as a class.
That's correct.
We treat everybody individually, and everyone has the independent right to make their own decisions as to what they should do. Should I pay? Should I not pay? It's going to be their individual call. We are not treating it as a class, and that's very, very important that everybody understands that. There's been a lot of talk about class actions against Getty, and we're not pursuing that at this time. There's already a lawsuit by some photographers as a class action, but none from end users. So the real goal is to try to see if we can make this problem go away for these individuals. I know one thing's for sure. You and I, from the very beginning of this whole thing, from when you started the site, from when we joined on and started putting the letter program and just started giving out our information, we have been very steadfast in the fact that we do not approve of copyright infringement.
That's correct.
We are not trying to promote copyright infringement. We are not trying to encourage people to take images that don't belong to them and make use of them.
Yes.
What we're saying is that when that happened, and as far as I can see from my 90 clients, all of them are innocent infringers. They did not know they were using copyrighted material, and they made a very minimal use of that. They didn't resell the image. They didn't make a commercial product out of the image. They decorated a website with either all or part of an image. That has to be treated in a very different manner than someone really stealing your material and trying to make a commercial benefit out of it.
Well, Oscar, I'm going to take an opportunity and interject my opinion here, given the update. Now, if there's going to be a line in the sand drawn, basically one of the things I would do is I would write a letter to the CEO or escalate this matter, mainly because there's only so far you can go with these legal disputes in terms of an agreement or a disagreement. If you guys can't come to an agreement, then there's a stalemate. Now, for people who want that certainty, I certainly would want to talk to management, because management could, in fact, make this go away. They said, look, we shouldn't go after these people who have like one image. I mean, because it's a waste of time. Or it's not good PR. Like, for example, one of the backlashes is people have asked me, because the people know about my dispute with Getty, they're asking me, well, where would I go? And I've told people I'm not going to any photo website. To be honest with you, I'm pretty much gun shy, and I use photos in my books, and I'm sticking to the government agencies, as you said. No one can copyright government works, or I will hire someone to create an illustration. I'm not talking about clip art now. I'm talking about hiring someone to do it, and it can be done very inexpensively. So my position has been to stay away from this whole photography deal, if you can at all help it. And this is one of the backlash, and I'm going to say it loud and clear because it's ridiculous, because there's no reasonability. To me, they're being unreasonable. Right. That's the whole thing. It's not because they're going after people or trying to enforce it. I don't have a problem with it. It's just they're being unreasonable.
No, I certainly welcome and feel that people should enforce their intellectual property rights, and certainly that's what we do mostly in this arena, is rewrite cease and desist letters on behalf of our clients who've had their content taken. So it's a fine thing to enforce your intellectual property. There's no problem with that. Question is how you do it and how much you're asking for, and not having a rational basis for the damage that you seek. I mean, for example, even in some cases where we've had responses from Getty that says, look, we licensed this image just last year to somebody for $600 for 2 years. Okay? Well, my response to that is, well, then why are you asking me for $1,300? Your actual damages are $600. That's our starting point.
Well, we already know why.
Well, right, that's my point. So clearly, there are issues as to how much Getty is asking for. Now, that person decided to pay $600. I don't know why. Maybe they were given exclusivity. Maybe they just didn't want to have any part. Maybe they were willing to overpay. Maybe they were not an educated consumer. I don't know, and I don't care, because it should be what does the market rate bear for these images. And we're nowhere near, I think, those types of numbers. But I guess time will tell. I do agree that the situation is approaching the point where those people who have more than the average image count, I'm going to say something over 12.
That's a pretty large number.
Yeah, 10 to 12 are going to be facing the prospect that Getty may sue. You know, one of the concerns that I have with this lawsuit that we now represent this business on is that they're involved with 38 images. So
yes.
It doesn't really change the theory of our case at all, because the image is worth what the image is worth. But the first natural reaction someone's going to have is, how do you end up with 38 images innocently? And frankly, it's just as easy to do that with 38 images as it is with one. You go to what you think is a free photo stock site, and you just start picking up pictures. There's no watermark, there's no copyright notice, so you have no idea.
You know, it's funny you mentioned that. I was just on a clip art site the other day, and it was allegedly free clip art and all of that stuff, and it looked like a professional site, and it was royalty-free. But I was, because of all this, I've been gun-shy. I was like, oh, no, I'm not taking any chances.
Right.
You know, this is too good to be true. I am not touching this stuff, even though they say, you know, it's royalty-free and there's no cost and there's public domain. I still won't touch it. Can you imagine that?
Right, absolutely. People first have to realize that royalty-free is different than public domain. That's the first thing. There's royalty-free, there's rights managed, there's other terms of art out there.
Yeah.
Public domain is the only one that is guaranteed, if you will, not to have copyright attached to it. But those are going to be much older photographs. Copyright law now says you have a copyright in a work of art for up to 70 years after the date of the death of the author. So unless you're going to be looking at black and white photographs from the 1920s, chances are you're not going to be using public domain photos. But, you know, the other thing you mentioned is, you know, do it yourself. And certainly there are so many ways you can create an original digital image for your business.
Absolutely.
You can either hire a professional photographer or take it yourself. And using some relatively cheap software, you can Photoshop it, to use a term. You can magnify it. You can change the colors on it. You can change the appearance of it. I think it's really time that people need to start doing that until this arena gets a little bit less cloudy.
Yeah, it's very unfortunate.
100% right.
It's very unfortunate we've had to come to that. It's that we have to tell people that, you know, take your own photos, because you just don't know what these guys are going to do. It's very unpredictable. And
just being involved in it is a hassle. Even if you've done nothing wrong and you did innocently, you know, you're still getting these letters, you're still getting these phone calls. You still used an image that probably belonged to Getty, and now it's a question of how did you get it, where did you get it from? It's a difficult situation. No one likes to be sued, whether you're right or wrong. No one likes to get involved in the court process.
Well, Oscar, I'm going to put you on the spot. What is your opinion about, I mean, this whole controversy has been building and building and building. It's like a slow crock-pot thing. Do you think this is going to hit more mainstream, I mean, in terms of publicity? I mean, do you think word is already getting out? We're like the #1 site regarding the whole demand letter issue. And what are your feelings about this publicity gaining ground? What do you think? Do you think management even knows about what's going on? And I'm not talking about the legal department. I'm talking about executive management.
I think they do. I think we had one client of ours who decided to write a letter to management.
Yeah.
They are a former Getty customer. They spend, he estimated, about $5,000 a year in images off of Getty.
Yeah.
And they wrote to the executives to say, look, you know, we're being asked for, you know, $1,300 per image. They've got 3 images, by the way. And I spoke with him just today and advised him to send a follow-up letter attaching the invoices that he's paid. He's bought images from Getty for as little as $10. He's bought some for $150. He's bought some for just close to $200, but those are much higher resolution, by the way, and they're used to print as opposed to, you know, just decorate a website.
That's correct, yes.
So he's, you know, going to consider sending these invoices out and say, look, why are you asking me for $1,300 when your own site, you know, would have charged me, $50 to $100 for some of these images. So I think that's a very good idea. And I think that's one of the things that you and I have spoken about, an open letter to management. Right now, we're really just trying to deal with this through corporate counsel to see if this approach works first. We have been very, I'm going to say prudent, but we've not looked for publicity. I think this case is a naturally interesting one, as of a little person being thrown into a very complicated legal issue, unknowingly. But we haven't sought that out because most of the clients don't want that, and they want to just try to resolve this.
Well, I will publicly say that I think that you are extremely diplomatic. I think you're very rational. You're very reasonable. You're very patient.
Well, I appreciate
far
that.
more
Not
than I ever could be. Well, I understand, but
yeah.
but that shows me that you're very good at negotiations and everything. Whereas me, I kind of I want to take my gun out and start blasting. Sometimes it works.
Not literally.
Yeah, right, exactly. We're talking figuratively, not literally. I just don't like being attacked, and my patience runs low, and I think you've been incredibly patient. I think that Getty is doing themselves a disservice by not coming to some agreement with you because you are so rational and so reasonable. I mean, because this really could turn to a much more aggressive stance.
Right, what I've also tried to explain to them...
And I tell you, I think the fallout's going to be much larger if this thing starts going to suit, much like RIAA.
Right, exactly. I mean, that's a good example. If we look at the recording industry, they filed all of these downloadable songs suits against,
Oh, there was an outrage over that.
There was a huge backlash.
Oh, huge.
Didn't like it. The media didn't like it. Everybody saw themselves in that position, and I think they'll see the same thing.
It was very distasteful. Very
when
distasteful.
They get wind. Yeah, it is, because, and especially when I think when courts learned that we were willing to offer something that was very reasonable, I think they are going to take a very hard line on it. But the other issue, of course, is that publicity generates itself. Someone's going to catch wind of it. It is the internet. The buzz starts, and then people will catch on to it and report on it. Hopefully, people will see our position as the right one and the reasonable one. And so I'm not afraid of that at all. And I don't know whether Getty is or not. But certainly, they have to understand that this is something that's really been buzzed about on the internet. Lots of people out there are talking about it. There's lots of concern about it. Thousands and thousands of people are coming onto the site for information. They're coming onto other forums that are discussing it. So I hope that at some point the light bulb is going to go off and say, hey, we need to look at this as a policy issue. This is not good for business. This is not good for the use of digital imagery. This is not good for website developers. This is not good for the end users. Nobody's profiting, other than financially, from scouring, the net, looking for these types of lawsuits and asking for outrageous amounts of money.
Well, Oscar, I definitely hope that you make some progress in finding a reasonable settlement. I mean, I definitely do, because if Getty is really hell-bent on filing lawsuits on a lot of people, I think it's going to get very, very ugly very, very quickly. Because I think a lot of people who have been very quiet thus far, if once they pull that trigger, I think a lot of people are going to explode. I mean, they're just going to be very upset, and they're going to get very vocal. It's kind of funny. I mean, you and I met. In many ways, I have to thank Getty for our friendship.
Yeah, right.
I mean, it's really kind of strange. In a way, I'm glad I got that letter. Otherwise, you and I would never have become friends and business associates. It's kind of strange.
The other thing, Eddie, you should be looking at the fact that we're providing information to people, and we're educating them on how to manage their digital imagery properly, so that they don't continue to infringe. I think people who come across our website, are much less likely to infringe. They're going to be educated.
Oh my gosh!
They're going to know that having no watermark and no copyright is no excuse. They're going to be learning a lot about how to better protect themselves and make sure they get a truly licensed or free image. I've tried to make that point to Getty as well, that I think our position is helping their cause as much as it is helping the end users who get these letters.
Well, I also want to say something to publicly commend Getty. I mean, it sounds like I'm against them all the way, but I have been happy to hear that what you were telling me of regarding that they're listening to these arguments regarding nonprofits and hobbyist type of usage, and you've been able to make a little bit of progress that way. So I think there is a little bit of hope. There's a little bit of hope.
they're also engaging in professional, intelligent discourse. I mean,
well, that's true. That's
it's
true.
not ranting and raving.
Yes.
They're not saying it's our way or the highway. They have been patient on their end in the sense that they've been open to listening to our arguments. They've been reading the letters that we're sending to them. They've been evaluating them. Now, look, as anybody knows, you get two lawyers in a room, you're going to get three opinions. But the fact is that they are at least engaging in the dialogue, and I think,
yes.
and I hope they're coming from the good place of trying to say, is there a way to meet somewhere in the middle and resolve this? And we'll know. I think we're going to know soon enough, man. I think you're right. I think that the time is we're going to know.
Once we get to that point, there comes an impasse, and as far as I'm concerned, there has to be a third party. And I just think that going through the court system is a very, very expensive proposition. And my next recommendation is bringing management into this discussion and see what they got to say. That would be my tack if it ever came to that far.
I agree. I think that's a good.
Because ultimately they can resolve this. They can say, you know what, this is being unreasonable for some of these people, and the legal department would follow along. And for the people who are more egregious, then I would say they're well within their rights to go ahead and pursue, which doesn't bother me that much, to be honest with you.
Exactly. And, we'll have to wait and see, but I think we're going to get our answer fairly soon.
Okay. Well, Oscar, I really appreciate your time on this discussion, on this latest update. I think our listeners will greatly appreciate this update. It's been long coming, and I hope that the folks at Getty will listen to this and take a balanced view of this. Do you have any parting words for this recording?
No, just that we welcome people to come onto the site, post your questions, let us know, what you think of the site. Take a look at the information that we provide. Don't panic when you receive one of the Getty letters. Get informed first, and then either drop us an email or give us a post on the forum, and we'll be glad to address it. But once again, it's always good to speak with you, Matt, and we're going to keep people updated as we address some of these issues that we said are coming up.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.